first, I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to mindfulness and karma choice. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, and training that we typically use something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And so that's a very, I would say, more regimented approach to clinical difficulties. And so a friend of mine, Sarah Nichols, said, hey, why don't you check this mindfulness stuff out? I was like, that's like going to sit on a carpet. It's all touchy feely. I'm not that kind of person. And so I went and I did it, and I was just blown away. I just couldn't believe I had been living a good portion of my life on autopilot. I didn't know it. And so I just started. I didn't fully embrace mindfulness at that point, but I was becoming a believer. And then I started to do a bit more, and I started to engage my family in a mindful way, and particularly my children, and especially my youngest, Sammy. And I was blown away by what I had missed with my other two kids. I mean, with Sammy giving him a bath, I remember the little suds on his chin, and how he looked like a Santa Claus, and the drips running down his face, and it creates such rich memories. So clinically, I'm focused on how mindfulness can help regulating emotion, but I think there's so much more to be gained by living a mindful life. Okay, so anyway, Sarah Nichols introduced me to Fiona, and we met at Panera, and we planned our first study. And that study looked at anxiety and mindfulness. It was what's called a quasi-experiment, so I'll tell you a little bit about that one. Then we're always trying to get more for less, and so we embedded in one of our projects what's called a validation study. So one of the things with mindfulness studies is we don't know exactly all that's going on when we're training mindfulness. We have some clues, but there's a lot under the hood that's happening. And so a second thing that we went for was something called self-compassion. So we wanted to design a measure, a clinical tool about self-compassion, and I'll link that up to why we're doing these things and how that relates to mental health and wellness, etc. And then we're also interested in the broader impact of mindfulness on a school. It's in some sense, if you imagine you can get a whole classroom of kids to pedal just a little bit harder, the things you can do. In the same way, you can get each kid to be in the present moment a little bit more, be a little bit kinder, be a little more accepting. It creates an accepting climate and a feedback loop. And those feedback loops can be very powerful and carry those kids who are struggling a bit more along with them. The kids that are more likely to be ostracized or possibly accepted a little bit more, that's something else we're after. So our first project was what's called, as I said, a quasi-experiment. And what that means is we didn't randomly assign. So really, if you want to do a true experiment, you randomly assign some kids to mindfulness, some kids not. But that's very difficult when you only, it's not feasible sometimes. And so what we did was we had 2 schools that received mindfulness and 1 school that served the control group. What we always do is we give them mindfulness ultimately, but we had them wait. And what we're interested in is, could we move the level of anxiety these kids were experiencing? Could we decrease it overall? And then secondly, could we get a window on what the causal mechanism was? So what is it that these kids are learning that's changing their anxiety symptoms? We don't want to just change symptoms. We want to know what is it they're picking up. And so we measured something called, some people, and these guys said, don't use this term, I'll explain it. Something we call psychological inflexibility. And in a nutshell, what that is are you rigid in terms of the way you view your emotions, or are you more accepting? So imagine if I feel distressed, push that away, gotta make that go away. Oh, I'm distressed, I'm gonna watch some TV. I'm distressed, I'm gonna play some video games. I'm distressed, I'm gonna get stoned. I'm distressed, I'm gonna do something else and not address that feelings. And you can imagine if you live in the world that way over time, you don't develop skills. And we're all gonna have a hard time at one point or another. And you can imagine if across your entire childhood you don't do that, you're gonna be at a disadvantage because there will be bumps in the road. So one of the things that we think that the Karma Choice program and mindfulness programs in general teaches is a different way of relating to one's emotions, one of acceptance. And more broadly, we think that by engaging your emotions in that way, it changes how you view yourself. And that's why we're interested in self-compassion. You can imagine, we've spoken a little bit about the tragedies that have been in the news and that have happened in your community specifically. And you know, we wonder, how did someone get to that point? And what I think personally is it's an intense emotion that you just are not able to escape, and it's internalized, and it's personal. And somehow, by building up these skills and for an individual in a context, we're able to have a safety valve that allows us to release some of that tension so that we can move forward and enjoy the life that we have. So in this closet experiment, we looked at this measure of self-acceptance, and what we were able to show, and what's called the causal model. We were able to measure people over time and use something fancy called structural equation modeling to show that to the extent that a kid individually picked up a self-acceptance skill, their anxiety was reduced. Versus kids that didn't receive mindfulness, that wasn't the case. And this is the first time, believe it or not, this has been shown in children, so we were very proud of that. So that study is done and submitted to a journal and resubmitted to another journal. So it's just the way academic work goes. So we thought, okay, now that we've done this, we want to do it bigger and better, as Fiona always does. And so now we've done a randomized trial, which means that we had a random assignment. We assigned some classrooms to mindfulness, some to a wait list. Same exact study, more children. Well, we finished this study, and we're analyzing those data. Hopefully we'll be able to say that mindfulness has a causal effect on anxiety. I'm an anxiety program, but really I think that mindfulness impacts a broad range of emotions, not just anxiety. But anxiety, I think, is one of the core emotions. A lot of times when kids are angry, when you really dig down on it, they're anxious. It just so happens that instead of flight, running away, they choose fight. And we know that if you're anxious long enough, that can wear you down and get you depressed. Anxiety and depression go hand in hand. So this is why we're going after anxiety initially, but really we think that it impacts a range of emotions. So Fiona mentioned that I was interested in the brain, and one of the things that I'm very interested in is why we avoid, and the relief we get from avoidance, and how that can be a cyclical, problematic issue. We may avoid by using substances, we may avoid by self-injury, as I said before, TV, video games, and all these types of coping mechanisms aren't all that healthy. And mindfulness teaches something else. It teaches acceptance. So it's, as opposed to avoiding and escaping something and being on autopilot, I'm noticing it, sitting with the feelings, and they dissipate, and I'm on to the next step. And we believe that this is a better way. So lastly, I want to tell you about two things. One about self-compassion work we're doing, and then our plans for the future. So in terms of self-compassion, a woman by the name of, last name is Neff, Christian Neff, has been interested in the self and how mindfulness, how our relationship with our emotions impacts how we feel about ourselves and our identity. And this work in adults has shown that there's actually a change process that happens when you engage in the mindfulness practice over an extended period. But no one's ever looked at this in kids. But adolescence is a time of identity development and also a lot of emotional struggles where some kids, for whatever reason, end up not feeling so good about themselves. A lot of self-loathing and not so good coping. And so we wanted to study this, we had no measures. If I asked a teenager, do you love yourself? They'd be like, wow, my kids, who loves himself? What are you getting at with that? So we decided that we would design a tool to measure this in middle schoolers. And we did a fancy statistical approach called factor analysis. And what we're finding is that our scale does work. We're able to get at those aspects of self-loathing, kids that really feel negatively about themselves. Not exactly self-esteem, something a little bit deeper than that. And then also we're measuring the positives. So kids that are able to, that they feel okay with themselves and their affect.